Hello everyone. This would be a re-recorded session for day 5 Azure Fabric. So to get started with, in last 4 sessions, we kind of covered the importance of the four services which we have briefly understood. Maybe the storage account, what kind of storage account we have, what all services which are present in the storage account. We have also seen service like SQL Server and SQL database. And as well as we have seen an Azure SQL, which is an independent standalone service. So it's a slightly different perspective. So in today's session, we would be covering in detail aspects related to the Azure Data Factory. It would be a new service which we would be starting today, Azure Data Factory, which is service for ADF. So ADF signifies Azure Data Factory. Now, someone will have a question that why is it called as Azure Data Factory? I mean, it's a part and parcel of Azure Cloud. That is the reason it is called as Azure Data Factory. In simple terms, it is only called as Data Factory. In simple terms, it is only called as Data Factory. It is not Azure Data Factory just because it's a part and parcel of Azure Cloud. That is the reason it is called as Azure Data Factory. Now, the same service is also available in Power BI .com, or which is now a Fabric entity. That same Azure Data Factory is also available there. It is not called as Azure because it's not a part of Azure Cloud in the Fabric environment. Moreover, it's a part and parcel of the Power BI service or maybe a Fabric environment. Now, if I show you the exact difference, if I go here, we are in the Power BI. We are in the Power BI service. If you see here, this is the Power BI service. Now, if you click on this leftmost icon, Power BI, we have an option called as Data Factory. It is only Data Factory. Now, the icon is different. Okay. It's a green color, some green color icon here. And if I go to the Azure portal, let's first create the Data Factory here, a new service here. So we will follow that same approach, which we follow on usual basis, which I would recommend to follow for a longer duration because you should know the hierarchy, you should know the flow of data. Because if you're not following this flow of hierarchy, somewhere in between, you will tend to forget what you mean by subscription. After subscription, what is a resource group? After resource group, what are the services and resources? So I would always recommend to go with this specific flow. Click on the subscription. Go to subscription, come down to the resources group or maybe resource group. In which specific resource group you want to create, click on that resource group. Now you have a flexibility. We have seen, we have created few resources here. Let's create the new resource, which we are looking out for today. Now we want to create Data Factory. See, it is not recommended to mention Azure here. Anyways, we're in the Azure portal. Only mention Data Factory. That's it. It will go and search that specific service. And if you see the very first component or the very first service which is getting reflected is the Data Factory, which we need to create. It's an ETL. So what simpler meaning of Azure Data Factory is? It's a ETL tool. It's an ETL tool. I mean, now what exactly ETL tool is, how it works. It's a extraction. We can do extraction of data. We can do transformation of data, and then we can load the data. Kind of loading it to certain sources where we need to further connect. Maybe we need to have a reporting on that data which is loaded. So somewhere extraction can be done. Now, the reason to create or reason to use this ADF is there are very few, if the data is very high in scale, if you cannot manage ETL on large scale using some reporting tools, it has to be done externally. So that is the reason to primarily use this ADF. Now let's first create that service. So you don't have multiple options just like SQL. When I have created a SQL server, when you start creating a SQL server, you won't have many options available. You have many options available for SQL. Whereas in case of Data Factory, there are very limited. It's only one service, not like the SQL. So you can click on this Data Factory. Let me click on create. So it will ask me where do I want to create and what is the ideal name for it. So we have a flexibility. Let me give it certain name. So we can give a certain name to this Data Factory instance. So, what can be a best fit? What can be the best fit name? So that is what we are looking out for. Now, let me mention Yep. So I want to create a specific data factory with this name. So default it is East US, let it be. Let me click on next. Now in the next window, you have this option called as Git configure. Now this is auto enabled, which is configure Git later. Now what is the exact Git configuration? Many people who are working professionals, they will understand what do you mean by Git, what is the importance of Git. But in simpler terms, what do you mean by Git? Say it's a version control tool. It's a version control tool. Now, what do you mean by version control? What do you mean by version control? See, assume that, version control can be multiple choices. So there are two teams. There are two different teams. Might be one is the development team, and okay, if there is certain requirement in the development team, they always connect with the client, and depending on that requirement, they do all these transformations in the ETL. I mean, ETL is primarily used for transforming the data. Extraction and loading are start and ending, but in between there are some transformations, there are some logics which are built here. So if at all a development team has created a pipeline, now with a certain logic, there is a certain logic for this pipeline. Now somewhere that logic has changed, a different perspective has came up from the stakeholder or the client. So if there is a change in logic, that same person or development team will come down and they'll use that same pipeline. With that same pipeline, they'll try to change the logic. Change the logic. So if there is a change in logic, if you directly change it, the earlier logic, what we have written, that logic is not captured. Why? Because you have updated it recently. But in order to capture what was the previous logic, earlier, there was some other requirement, but as and when the data changes or as and when the client requirement changes, we are coming back and changing our logic. So somewhere we have to track that history. This is our history data. This is our history data, or maybe previous previous info. So you want to keep a track of it. You want to keep a track of it. So in that case, you need to control your previous versions. So in order to make sure you are controlling that previous versions, you can use this Git configuration. It's a version control system that allows easier change tracking and collaboration. Now, it is not at all recommended to compulsory use Git for Data Factory. If there is any change in pipeline logics, if you want to track it, only then it is recommended. 60-70% of the time, people tend to directly use Data Factory without any GitHub or the version control requirement. As and when if the client requirement is there, only in that case, version control is used. Now the same version control, okay, now the question is, the reason if you compare this version control to Power BI, in Power BI also reports also changes. Even the reports also changes. So how do we make sure that changes are captured? In Power BI, there is a flexibility. I mean, you can download the PBX file. You can download the PBX file. Even there is a possibility to connect it to the powerbi.com. There is a possibility. I mean, there is an option available, but usually it is not recommended. Why? Because you can download the PBX file. So assume that there was a previous report which is created. You can download that PBX file and you can share, I mean, store it somewhere. There can be a SharePoint. There can be a common SharePoint folder which can be shared with a team. I mean, it is shared with all team members. So in that case, you can upload that previous PBX file to this SharePoint folder with version 0, the latest one, I mean, the first version. If the new updates are coming to the Power BI, you can keep it as version 2, version 3, version 4. So you can download that multiple PBX file and you can share it with the SharePoint folder. That option is not available in ADF. Whenever you create any specific logics or transformations, once you, I mean, you cannot download that specific condition, you cannot download it. So for that reason, it's a purely cloud based tool. You cannot download anything. That is the reason the version control is kept in the ADF. The primary aim to use that Git configuration. Now let's head over. This is second option. Let me go to next. We should make sure it is always connected to, I mean, it is always checked into public endpoint so that we can connect ADF with multiple sources. Let me click on next. No other options are required, it seems. Okay, so I'm in the last tab, review and create. So it will review the information. By the time it gets review, let's see. Okay, let me click on create. So it will take some time to create this Azure Data Factory service. Now, once you click on go to resource, A data factory is created. Now, this is how the basic view of a data factory service looks like. You'll get all the access controls, activity log, but data factory is a separate service. It will open in a different window. There is an option called a studio. It will open a new studio where you can do all the development, your pipelines, your transformations, that all can be done here. Now let me click on Launch Studio. It will open a new tab. You can see it's going towards navigating to a different tab, and it's opening a complete separate studio. Now, first we have to understand what you mean by ADF. What are the components of ADF? Prior jumping to directly to the components, let's understand what we can do here. Now, this is the basic UI of ADF. Towards left, you'll get some informations. You can expand this. We have 5 different tabs which are available here. One is Home tab. One is Author tab. I mean, we are defaulting the Home tab. This is the Author tab. See, the pencil icon itself signify here you can create any pipelines. Pipeline is one of the component. We would be discussing in detail about pipelines, but pipeline is one of the component. I mean, you can, ETL is used for specifically creating the pipeline. So ADF is an ETL. So what you can do, you can create new pipelines, you can edit the existing pipelines, you can delete pipelines. So all that stuff, kind of development can be done here in Author tab. Now, once the pipeline is created, if you run that pipeline, if you run that logic, whether is it running or not, you can check in the third tab, which is Monitor tab. You need to monitor how pipelines are running. I mean, as of now, there aren't any pipelines, so you cannot see anything, but there are all informations here. Trigger, I mean, pipeline can be manual run also, pipeline can be automated run as well. So we have some components like triggers we would be discussing further, but how this conditions works, that we would be again, I mean, I would list out all the components of ADF, but in monitor tab, it is used to monitor the status of pipelines, whether it is running or not, how is it running, so what kind of whether it failed or not. I mean, maybe with, if it's failing, at which step it is getting failed. So all that information can be monitored here. Next to monitor tab, there is a manage tab, which looks like a setting, which looks like a setting icon. So in manage tab, you can, you have an option called as Git configuration here. I mean, you can again, in between, you want to configure Git. May not be at the start. In between also, you can configure the Git. There are other few options also. You want to change some settings. You want to do some edit options. There are multiple options here. So maybe going further, when we discuss everything in detail, you'll get a better idea. But in case of managed tab, it's more like a settings tab. And at the last tab is Learning Center. Now, what do you mean by Learning Center? Every service which is part and parcel of Microsoft has their own learning document for it. It might be Power BI, it might be SharePoint, it might be any specific product. Even with your Outlook and Teams, you have a learning document. There is a Microsoft Learn document. So similarly for ADF, you have a Learn document, you have some videos, you have some tutorials. You can complete that tutorials also to get or gain some insights. So this is Learning Center. If you click here, view all tutorials, or maybe you can quick start here, you have options here. So in simple terms, we have 5 tabs towards left, out of which the 3 tabs are frequently used. Maybe 90% of the usage is with the Author tab, because this is where the development, maybe editing, testing, all that can be done here. There is 5% chance you come down to Monitor tab to check the schedule refreshes, automated refreshes, or maybe manual refreshes. And there is an option 5% left out, which can be for settings. The Home tab and Learning Center are rarely we will come across. I mean, once you launch this ADF, you'll come down to the Home tab default. And in the Home tab, you have 4 different buckets, or maybe 4 different windows which are available. So one is ingest. Ingest means you can copy data from one movement, I mean, from one source to destination. That can be done using ADF. So these are the features of ADF. Orchestrate means you can create your pipelines, you can move the data, code-free data. That is also there. You can transform your data. You can perform some certain logics here using some transformations. And there is a configure SSIS. Now, what do you mean by SSIS? I mean, specifically, to brief you or to give you an idea, there are some legacy tools. I mean, previously there were some legacy tools by Microsoft, and that tools are replaced with the new latest tools. So there is a tool called as SSRS. There is a tool called as SSIS, and there is a tool called as SSAS. SSAS is not legacy. It is still yet used, or maybe it is still used frequently in today's world also. But there are the other 2 tools which are legacy tools. I'm not saying these are totally waived off, or maybe no companies using. There are few previous organizations who are using these tools, but nowadays many companies are moving out from SSRS. Now, what do you mean by SSRS? It's a SQL Server reporting service. So basically, it is a legacy tool for Power BI. Power BI is developed on top of SSRS. What features you get in SSRS, all that features are available in Power BI, and Power BI is even more powerful. You have multiple options in Power BI. There are very restricted options as compared to Power BI and SSRS. Now, SSIS is nothing but a ETL tool. It's a legacy tool. And on top of SSIS, the ADF is developed. And in simple terms, SSIS, you need to install an on-prem server to connect. So more a kind of on-premise applications, on-premise laptop, your desktops are used, your local system is used. Whereas ADF is simply plug and play. Why? Because you can connect it to cloud from anywhere. From cloud connection, we can connect it from any part of the world. No installation is required for ADF. You simply have your Azure account, or maybe even ADF can be shared with multiple individuals. If I go back, there is an option here, access control. The ADF which I have created, this service, I can share with multiple individuals. I can add a role assignment here. We might have seen in the previous sessions that how can you add a role assignment at subscription level, at resource level, or maybe at the resource group level also, or even at individual service or resource level. So similarly, you can share this ADF, even that is possible condition. So ADF is no installation required, whereas SSIS, we need to have some server installation. So that are all legacy tools. On top of it, ADF is developed, SSRS on top of it, Power BI is developed. SSAS is more a kind of tabular models. So more a kind of cubes and tabular models. This is still being used. This is still being used, widely used. Now, you can similarly integrate, but in SSIS also you can create the ETL pipelines. So you can easily integrate or configure that SSIS pipelines inside this specific ADF. You can easily connect it. So that is the reason they have an option to configure SSIS. So all these are features which are part and parcel of ADF, which are kept here in the home tab. Now let's come down to the author tab. Let's first see what all components we have in ADF. Let's first list down what all components we have in ADF. So to get started with, the first and important component is your pipeline. Now, this is what we start with. Once the pipeline is there, the second important component is linked service. The third important component is data set. Now we would be discussing all these components in detail to get a brief idea. Let me first list down. The fourth important component is activity, which is also called as transformation. The fifth important component is called as maybe data flow. The sixth component is called as trigger. Now, how trigger works, what is the exact use case that we would discuss. And the third, or maybe the seventh important component is called as Power Query. So somewhere data flows and Power Query are similar. They're not much different. Just like you have data flows in the Power BI portal, I mean the Power BI service account. Similarly, there is some similarity, not everything is same. There is a kind of difference also what data flow and Power Query are. But yeah, somewhere it behaves or it works like that Power Query or Power BI component only. You can create some data flows or Power Queries in ADF. If I go to the author tab, you have an option data flows and Power Query. So these can be done here. Now, as we have listed down the important components in ADF, let us first understand how this works. Now, to get started with, we need to understand that what we are doing using this ADF. Let's take an example. A simple example, I want to move, there is a source which is data warehouse, and I want to move information from a data warehouse. There is a destination, which is our storage account, maybe a blob storage account. It can be a blob storage. So I want to move this information from source to destination. So how, this is just an example we would be considering. So in order to do this, we need to list down, I mean, pipeline, linked service, data set, activity, and maybe if as and when trigger is required, you can use it. So we need to list down all these components. So let's first understand what you mean by data warehouse. For the people who have joined with SQL and for the people who have joined with Power BI, they might have already know the importance of data warehouse. But just to give you a brief idea about what exactly data warehouse is. So to get started with, let's first understand what you mean by data warehouse. So, I mean, we would be discussing about data lakes, data warehouse, data mart, and database. So we have a data lake here. We have a data warehouse here. We have a data mart here. And at the last, we have a database. So how this works is, let's take any real-time example. So I'm taking an example of soap. Soap is a finished product, right? So soap is part of database, which is a finished product. Now, what is the ideal aim of database? Everything is correctly managed. I mean, the data is structured data. So soap is more a kind of structured product, and everything is correctly manufactured and it is in a packed, sealed pack. So somewhere, if you consider this soap is manufactured in the factory. So soap is a combination of multiple raw materials. So factory, you can assume it as data lake. So there are multiple raw materials which are used or bind together to create this soap. So raw materials, a data lake can be, I mean, raw material means everything is unstructured. So a data lake is unstructured, more a kind of unstructured. Now, once that product is manufactured, it goes through certain process. It goes through certain go down. So data warehouse, you can call it as a go down. Now, go down is also called as warehouse, right? Somewhere it is also called as warehouse. So we need to understand what do you mean by go down and what do you mean by warehouse. In case of data lake, every raw material is combined together, which is more a kind of unstructured. In case of data warehouse is a semi-structured. I mean, it can take unstructured information also, but somewhere it has to be semi-structured information, or it can be structured information. It can take structured or well as semi-structured both components. And inside every data warehouse, I mean, if you take an example of soap, all the soaps are kept together in one single rack. It might be a bathing soap, it might be a toilet soap. So all there are multiple soaps which are available. So every soap is clearly identified by each racks. So that rack where it is partitioned, it is called as a data mart. So somewhere data mart is also a part of data warehouse. Both are same entity. In data warehouse, semi-structured or maybe a structured information is kept, but how that information is arranged in separate racks is called as data mart. So in simple terms, data lake is highest than data warehouse is highest than data mart is highest than database, because database is more a kind of purely structured information, whereas data warehouse, I mean, data mart is a part of data warehouse, so somewhere it's a semi-structured, both the components are structured or semi-structured. In case of data lake, more a kind of unstructured raw material is dumped. I mean, you can even dump the structured information data lake, that won't be a problem. But in case of database, you cannot dump unstructured information. It has to be structured, it has to be relational. It has to be a clean data in database. Whereas in case of data lake, you can dump any random raw data, you can dump any structured data, it will take all kinds of data. So somewhere data lake is highest, then comes the data warehouse, then comes the data mart, which is part and parcel of warehouse, and then comes the database. This is the primary aim. Now we want to move the information from one data house, a data warehouse, to a specific storage account. That is our aim, to create the ADF pipeline. So how is it done? What all components will come to picture, that we would be going to see. See, if you want to create that movement of data, there is a source and destination, right? So we will mention the source and destination. This is our source and this is our destination. So in terms of ADF, source is called as source only, destination is sometimes called as target, and somewhere destination is also sometimes called as sink. Sink. Now, once the source and destination are there, the information is kept in data warehouse. So somewhere the information is a semi-structured format. If you want to get the data, extract the data, there has to be some key to it. I mean, you want to access this data warehouse, there is a username and password, right? There should be a username and password for this data warehouse. So if you want to connect this, you need to access this username and password. In order to access this, there is a component called as linked service. This is linked service at source level, which is linked service 1. Now, what is the exact usage of this linked service? It's an access control mechanism. You can use access. You can mention your username, password, how you want to connect to this data warehouse, or maybe the source, any kind of source. Now, once this, linked service is there, again, whatever transformations you are doing in between, once that is done, you want to dump it to destination. So in destination, if it's a blob storage, you want to access this blob storage. Even for a blob storage, username and passwords are there. How to access it? Again, there would be one more linked service. This is linked service for destination, which is called as linked service 2. And again, it's the same access control mechanism. You have your username, you have your password, you have your access credentials, all are mentioned in the link service destination. Now, once that is done, the information in the data warehouse can be in a different format. You have to convert it to the ADF standard format. ADF needs to understand the data. So in order to understand the data, there is a component called as dataset. This is called as dataset. So what it will do, it will convert the data warehouse standard format data into ADF standard format. Again, that same data set is also present at the destination end. Why? Because once the transformation is done, the data is in the ADF format. You want to dump it to the blob storage. In blob storage, it can be a text file, it can be .csv file, it can be .excel file. So how you want to dump, which format you want, that you have to change it in the data set, destination data set, and using link service, you have to connect it to the destination, which is blob storage, and further you have to dump it. So we have link service at both the ends. We have data sets at both the ends. Now, in between data set and link service, there can be a pipeline. This is what the pipeline is. This is your complete pipeline. Now, in between pipeline, there are transformations. In between pipeline, there are few transformations. So this is one transformation and this is second transformation. So these transformations are called as activities. This is activity 1. This is activity 2. I mean, there can be only one activity also. If there is only one activity here and there is a pipeline, still, I mean, for one activity, there isn't any pipeline. Usually the dataset and link service are not visible to our eyes. We do create dataset and link service, but it is not visible. Somewhere it is connected to pipeline, but it is not visible. So in that case, if there is only one activity, the dataset and link service are connected, but that are not visible. That are part and parcel of activity. But if there is no another activity, there is no pipeline like structure. So one of the frequently used single activity is a copy. There are multiple activities. We would be discussing all that activities. But if there is only one copy activity, in our example, we want to copy from this source to destination. If there is only one copy activity, still it is called as a pipeline. Pipeline can be combination of multiple transformations, which are called as activities, or it can be only one single activity as well. Now, if you want to run this pipeline, there is an option. If you want to manually run it, there is an option called as debug. And you can automate this pipeline also. Maybe at certain time you want to run it. You need not come and manually run it. So there you should use a component called as trigger. Trigger is an automation. You want to schedule these pipelines. There are three different triggers. One is scheduled trigger, one is tumbling window trigger, and one is event-based trigger. We would be discussing all these components going further, but just to give you an idea, there are three different triggers, which is more a kind of automation of a pipeline. You want to automate that pipeline. Rather than running it manually, you want to automate that pipeline. So this is how the basic components of ADF look alike. Now, Power Query data flow, that are additional part, we would be seeing that as and when we proceed further, but these are the basic components of ADF. Now let's go back. Let's see how is it created. Now, I don't have any data warehouse and blob storage created as of now, but let's see how it is done. First thing is we need to create a pipeline. So if you go to this author tab, you have a flexibility. So rather than directly jump into pipeline, in the blue ribbon bar, there are a few other options here available. One is updates. You can see all the updates related to ADF are all listed here. Since the inception of ADF, all the updates are listed. Last 5 or 6 years, all the updates are there with their date also being mentioned. So just like Power BI gets monthly updates, even ADF gets, may not be monthly, but yeah, there are few updates which are coming into picture, and that all updates are available inside this updates icon here. There is a switch data factory available. You can create multiple data factories in one single subscription. I mean, multiple data factory services in one single subscription. If you want to switch that, you have an option called a switch button, maybe switch icon here. We have a notification tab, which is also available in the blue ribbon or maybe blue window or blue bars here. So if the pipeline is getting failed, if the pipeline is getting run, you can check here in the monitor tab, or else a notification would be sent. Just like your mobile applications, a notification would be sent. So notification tab, you have a settings tab. In settings tab, there are not much settings. This is more a kind of theme settings. You want to change any language options, that is also available. You have an help and information tab. This is your feedback tab. I mean, if you want to do some, give some feedback related to the Azure Data Factory, you can give a feedback here. And anyways, this is our login credentials, the login email ID. So straightforward options. Now, first we have to create a pipeline. See, either you can search here if there are any pipelines which are already created, or you can also search here. This is a global ADF search, and this is only restricted to the author tab. What all components are below here? Pipelines, data sets, change, maybe any data captures, data flows, you can search here. You want to search in complete ADF, the triggers, linked services, all that can be searched in the global search bar, which is available in the blue ribbon. Okay, now let's first create a pipeline. See, you have an option. If you click on this pipelines or maybe hover on this pipelines, 3 dots will come. Either you add a new pipeline here, or else if you go to plus icon, you have an option called as pipeline. You can create a pipeline. So let's create a pipeline. It has opened a pipeline. See, nothing is there. It's a blank development window. Maybe I'll give it a name, test pipeline. I've given it a certain name. You can close this properties tab. If you click here, that window is gone. Maybe if you want again, you can click here. That properties tab will come again. So now the question is, the pipeline is created. Now, what is the primary aim here? We have activities. Activities once your transformations. We have more than 20 plus activities. May not be all 20 frequently used, but there are 15, 12 to 15 activities which are frequently used. Maybe more than 20 activities are there. As and when the activities updates changes, but usually we use 8 to 10 or maybe somewhere around 12 maximum activities on day-to-day basis. So how that activities are there, that are all classified into different categories. So you want to expand, there is an option in the activities tab. See, you can minimize this activities tab also. You can expand it. There is a downward expand. Now, somewhere we have two activities which are part of move and transform. You want to expand all this, click on this. Everything is expanded, and you can see somewhere around 20 plus activities of transformation are present here. There are multiple activities. You can see here, you have a copy data, you have a data flow. You can create your Databricks notebook, and you can call that notebook inside a pipeline also. Maybe we would not discuss in depth of Databricks because there the Python comes into picture. But yeah, you can integrate your Databricks notebooks also. As and when we go further, you'll get an idea about Databricks. So there are few delete activities. There are some general activities like fail, lookup, stored procedures. You can run it. Web activity, wait activities there. We have an activity for each, filter, until, if condition, if else condition activity. So there are multiple activities here. So our primary aim is to move data from a data warehouse, which is our source, to a storage account. So first I want to copy the data. So there is an activity, there is a transformation logic, which you can write in copy data. If I drag and drop, it's very straightforward. It will create an activity. Cloud-based ETL tool, straightforward to use. Just like you drag and drop a visual in Power BI, you can drag and drop an activity in ADF. If you double click on it also, let's see. be able to get that. Okay, there's this data flow. Somewhere if you double click on it also, sometimes it comes. But anyways, you have to drag and drop. Now, this is one of the activity. I mean, I want to, if I click on this copy data, you'll get few options here, right? General, source, sync, mapping, settings, user properties. Now, what I'll do, let's head over to the Fabric. Let's compare, do we have that same option in Fabric also? Let's go back to the Fabric. I'll go to the Data Factory here. So in Fabric, the UI is a bit different. See, I'm in the Data Factory, the icon is also different, but what you do in Azure Data Factory, that all can be done in the Fabric also. It's almost similar. There is not even a single change. Okay, the wordings are different, slightly wordings are different, may not be everything. You have an option called as pipeline here. Let me click on pipeline. It is asking me, let me give it a name, test pipeline. So we'll compare both the ADF and the Fabric Data Factory also. Now, if you see, the UI is not that great. The UI is not that great. You have an option called as activities. There are only few activities which are listed. There is one activity called as, there is a different tab called as activity. Now, we need to use this copy data. Let me add to Canvas. Canvas means your development workspace in Fabric for ADF. Both are same, not much difference, but the UI is not that great. You can see all the activities here. And if you want to see how many activities are there, you have to click on these three bars. You'll get all the activities which are also available in ADF, the Azure Data Factory. This is only Data Factory, which is part and parcel of Fabric. Now, if you see here, there are five different tabs: general, source, destination, mapping, and settings. If I go here, there are 6 different tabs. We have an additional tab called as user properties. Now, what do you mean by user property? We would be discussing further, but just to give you an idea, there is an additional information, but that is missing here in the Fabric. Almost all other conditions are the same. So let's first head over to the ADF, the Azure Data Factory in the cloud, and let's see how is it done. Our source, see, you have a source and sink here. Sink is nothing but your target. It is nothing but your destination. Our source is data warehouse. So let's first start with source. If I click on source, there is an option called a source data set. It is asking me to create a data set. Once you create a data set, there would be a linked service which is created along with this data set. So with that linked service, it will go and capture that access credentials of data warehouse, which is our source, and it will get the data and it will dump the data to a source data set, which is understandable by ADF. So let me click. There is no data set available, so I have to click on new. So let me mention data. So there is an option called as Microsoft Fabric Warehouse. Maybe let's click on continue. This is our source. Here it is asking me the name of the data set. You can rename that. So this is our source DW data set, data warehouse. It is asking me to create a linked service. Along with data set, with this explanation which I've given, along with data set, there has to be linked service which is connected to the source. That same condition it is asking. We have the source tab of this copy activity. It has asked me to create a data set, and along with the data set, it is asking me to create a link service. So you have to create a link service. Let me click on new. Again, a new tab is getting opened above on top of data set, which is asking us to create a linked service. Here in linked service, you have to mention your access credentials. There are a few options here: service principal key. These are all independent options which are available. Maybe going further, you'll get, but more a kind of access control. You want to access the data warehouse, you can access using this service principal ID, service principal key. You have a Fabric environment. See what all Fabric workspaces are there. I can get that list and I can connect it to the certain warehouse, which is part and parcel of that workspace. So this is a linked service. You can rename that linked service also. Source linked service, source DW, data warehouse linked service. You can give it a name. So this is how it works. Now, as of now, we don't have any data warehouse created. That's the reason I may not capture these details, but yeah, in simple manner, how dataset and link services are created for this copy activity where I want to move from data warehouse to a specific storage account or a blob storage. Now let me cancel this, discard all the changes. Now, once the source is done, I mean, source settings are done, we have seen, you have to go to the sink, which is nothing but your target or destination. So you will always have a flexibility. Again, you have to create a new data set. Sync data set, I want to move it to the blob storage. Let me click on continue. See, once I've selected blob storage, how do you want to dump that data in blob storage? The data in ADF would be ADF format, but you want to dump it to blob storage. How do you want it? Text file, CSV file, JSON file, binary file, Parquet file. There are multiple file systems. We would be discussing all these in details, but to just give you an idea, what is the idea to behind create a data set in sync also to dump into that sync standard format from the ADF standard format. So let us go with CSV file. Let me click on continue. You can give it a name, target, maybe target file dataset. Done. So you have to create a linked service here also. Click on new. This is destination linked service. So you have an option. This is my subscription. Under this subscription, there is only one storage account which is created. I've selected the storage account. You have an option to check whether that linked service is correctly going to that specific storage account and getting connected. You can have an option test connection. So it is getting succeeded. That means linked service is working properly, and that data set on which top of linked service is also attached, it will work properly. So reason to have both linked services at source and sync, reason to have both data sets and source and sync. It will convert that source data to ADF format in the data set, and it is connected by a linked service, source linked service. And in case of sync, it will convert that ADF standard format data to the format to which you are dumping that data. And there is a linked service to connect that destination or a sink or a target. So as of now, we don't have, let me discard this, but I've given you an idea that how a linked service and data set is useful. There are a few more options also available. We would be seeing all these options, but let's head over to the general tab. So in general tab, there are few options here. I mean, the same can be done here in the Fabric. You have an option, you can click on source. If you click on more, what you want to connect, all that sources would be available. You can mention that source, data warehouse, and that same options are also available here in the Fabric environment. UI is different. There are few preview options. But in case of cloud, there are no preview. Everything is full and fledged available. In case of Fabric, there are few preview options which are still in beta version or development mode. But in case of Data Factory, limited previews are there. Now, I mean, what you do here, you can mention source and destination, and you have same options. You have a general option also available here. Now, let's see what all options we have in the general tab. See, in the general tab, you want to name this activity. This is copy data 1. If I drag and drop one more copy data, it is copy data 2. It is randomly giving some random names, maybe one after the other. Let me delete this. See, if I click on this activity, you will get this delete option. So I've deleted it. I'm in the general tab. You want to rename it. Copy data from data warehouse to blob. You can give it any name. If you want some additional description, you can write a description. Let me copy the same. Copy data from data warehouse to blob as CSV file. I mean, an additional description you want, you can give it. This is not compulsion, but name is compulsion. There should be certain name to it. Now, if I come down, there is an activity state. Now, what do you mean by activity state? Now, prior to get this activity state, for only one activity, there isn't any problem. Let me drag and drop few other activities to get an idea. There's an activity called as wait activity. So what I'll do, I'll create a pipeline. See, you can see there is a pipeline. There is a connectivity between multiple activities. Now, again, let me take some other activity. I delete. I'll get connected, and this is a continuous pipeline. Now, if there are these three activities and you are, maybe you want to check an idea. You want to give some try whether the activities are properly working. First and second is working. I only want to check the third one, which is delete activity. So it is not recommended to run all three activities every time in order to check. Maybe once the everything is correctly done, you can run that pipeline. It will work as it is. But in order to check while development, in order to check when any of the activities is working, there is this option called as activity state. Now I only want to run delete. You can deactivate this. You can see this is grayed out. Deactivate means this is only deactivated to not to run. Whatever logic you have mentioned here, it will be as it is. You can deactivate wait also. In wait also, you can see there is an activity state deactivated. And in delete, you want to run this. I only want to run this. You can only run this. Now, how to run this pipeline? There is an option. There is an option called as debug. This is your manual refresh. Debug is your manual refresh. You can manually refresh that component. Whereas you want some automation, there is an option called as trigger. So trigger now will work like debug only. Trigger now means it is automatically triggering. That means it's a manual effort. But if you want to add some trigger, you can add a trigger here. If you click on new trigger, it will create a new trigger, and there are types of triggers. Three different types. One is scheduled, one is tumbling window, and there is event-based trigger. Storage event and custom event are both clubbed together in one single component only. But there are three different triggers: scheduled, tumbling window, and event-based. I mean, you can schedule refresh this pipeline automatically at whatever times you want. After every 15 minutes, after every 15 days or 15 hours, 15 weeks, you have an option. You still have an option to specify end date also. You want to run this pipeline for a particular time only, from one day to another date. Maybe from 1st of every month to 30th of certain month. 1st of August to 31st of August. Even that is feasible. You can mention this end date. It is not compulsory. You can uncheck this option. But yeah, I mean, you can schedule refresh this. We would be discussing what do you mean by tumbling window, what do you mean by storage events, as and when going further. But there are three different types of triggers, and frequently used is scheduled trigger. It's an automation. So debug is directly running manual pipelines, and scheduled triggers, or maybe triggers, is nothing but a automation of pipelines which will run at that specific time intervals. Now, if you debug this, if I debug this, nothing will work. Why? Because we haven't set up any data slate, any source or destination. That is the reason it is giving error. But see, if I debug it, it is only giving error for delete, not for these two, because you have deactivated it. Okay, if there is a dependency of delete from these two components, you can again reactivate it. You can again reactivate it. Nothing would be changed, only for temporary purpose it would be deactivated. Now, apart from activity state, so you have some eye icons that will give you some idea about what is this condition, what is this, exact used for. There's an option called as timeout. See, if you want to run this copy activity for maybe longer hours, if the data is very large, it is running for a longer duration. You can maximum keep any activity to run for 7 days. If I remove this zero, see, this is seconds, this is minutes, this is hours, and this is days. Maximum is 7 days. So you can see if I have removed that zero, which is day condition, timeout is invalid. The value must be formatted as DHHMMSS, which is day, hours, minutes, and seconds, and be no more than 7 days. You cannot run any activity beyond 7 days. If you think that activity is running for 7 days, there are very rare chances, but still they have kept that option. There is a discussion going on to keep that restricted to only 24 hours. But 7 days is not required and should not be less than 10 minutes. So somewhere you can schedule it. I'll keep it to zero. I will change this 12 hours to maybe 00, and I'll change this to 30 minutes. If the data is very large, it should fail this copy activity within 30 minutes. So it will send a notification that after 30 minutes, this is failed, because in 30 minutes, I cannot copy this data. It is up to us. How do you want to keep this timeout? Now, after timeout, if the copy activity is getting failed, sometimes it will run in 20 minutes to copy. Sometimes it is taking more than 30 minutes. In that case, if you want to rerun this activity, there is an option called as retry. Now, retry zero means this copy activity will only run once. I'm in the activities options in the general tab. If you want to run this activity twice, I have to keep retry once. That means one would be default run, second would be retry run. If I want to run twice, you can keep it to two. But why to rerun it? If only it's, I mean, if there is any failure, in that case only it will rerun. Unless that it won't run. And after retry, there is an option called as retry interval. What do you mean by retry interval? Retry interval is nothing but how much time it should take to have a gap between each run. If copy activity is failing once, which is default run, and if the retry is kept to one, it will run the second copy activity second time, maybe after 30 milliseconds, 30 seconds, not milliseconds, 30 seconds. So it is up to us. You can give certain seconds, also 600 seconds. If you want to wait for 10 minutes, maybe it is up to us how many seconds you want to mention. So you can mention that seconds and it will wait until that specific seconds and it will retry the second run. So you have few options which are available. That same options are also available here. Timeout is there, retry is there. What is the retry interval? Secure output and input we would be discussing in further sessions. But yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, both are same. What you do in ADF, the cloud, that can be done in Fabric. UI is different. There is an option called as run. If you go to this run, there is an option called as run. Run means debug. There is an option called as schedule trigger. There are a few other triggers also directly available, but these are in preview mode. See, event-based triggers, preview mode. Not all the triggers are available in the Fabric environment, but yeah, almost all the options which you have in ADF that can be viewed here in the Fabric environment. Now let's head over. So what do you mean by wait activity? See, here, if I mention timeout, if I mention retry, and if I mention retry interval, it is waiting for 30 seconds to rerun that second retry. Whereas wait activity, if there is a bulk amount of pipeline, so if there is a multiple copy activities and there is, I mean, if that copy activities multiple times data is getting captured, big amount of data is captured. So there is a very high chance if that pipeline is running continuously, it will fail. Some network issues, there can be many reasons. So you can use this wait activity. We will be discussing all these activities in detail again, but just to give you an idea, wait activity, what it will do, it will wait, it will make sure there is an option here in the settings. You can mention how many seconds you want to wait once this copy is done. And then only it will go to further delete. So you can mention it, you have to wait for 10 minutes. You can mention 10 into 60, 600 seconds you can mention. So how it will do if this copy activity is run, it will succeed. It will wait for 10 minutes and then it will go to the delete. So somewhere there is a balance. Continuous flow of information is not there. It will halt for a few seconds, whatever seconds, minutes you have mentioned, you can do that. So there are many other activities also. Now in this activity tabs, you have seen an idea. See, I'm using, if I'm trying to connect multiple conditions, I'm using only green icon on success. There is on success, on failure also. If this copy activity is failing, even then it should wait. You can again reconnect it. Success and failure can be connected to that same further activity. Or else, maybe let me delete this. I can connect it to some other activity also. I can connect it to some other activity. I mean, if let me drag and drop set variable. So if this copy activity is getting succeeded, it should wait for certain time, which I've mentioned. If it is getting failed, on failure, I can connect it to this set variable activity. So there is a possibility you can connect. Apart from these two, there are other options. One is on skip. If you want to skip this specific transformation or activity. I mean, these are not used, skip and on completion, not specifically used. Completion means this activity is completed only then it will go to this. Anyways, on success also, somewhere it's almost same. There is very slight difference, but success and failure are frequently used. And this is how the pipeline looks. See, there is a plus and minus icon. You can minimize and maximize this also. or using your mouse. And if you run this, if you debug this, here our output window would be available. Now, we don't have all these linked services and data sets captured. That is the reason we are unable to see, but here in the output window will come here in the white space, and it will list down what all activities ran, whether it succeeded, whether it failed, all that information is captured here. Now, the question is, there can be two different ADFs also. Sometimes there can be two different ADFs. Might be development ADF and there can be production ADF. So if a pipeline is developed in development, how it can be moved to production? Again, whether there is a requirement to create all this. I mean, there is no option to download, right? In case of Power BI, we had an option download PBX file and you can share it to the SharePoint folder, like your previous versions, or maybe you want to move it from development. There is a pipeline option available, right? You can move using pipelines. There you can mention your workspace deployment pipelines. In case of ADF, how do we do that? See, in the properties tab, next to properties tab, there is an option called as JSON. What you do in ADF, that all is captured in the JSON code, JSON format. So if I click on this JSON format, what I have done inside this pipeline, everything is captured. I can copy this. Now assume that we are going back to a different ADF. Maybe we are in the same ADF, but we are going to different ADF. What I'll do, I'll go there, I'll click on new pipeline. Again, I'll go to the JSON code. I will remove everything. I've pasted that previous history. Thing is, you have to rename a pipeline here. Whatever name of that pipeline is, you should mention that pipeline name here. That's it. It should be same. If I click on OK, my bad. That name should be same. You can see that different pipeline is created without any errors. The thing is, once you copy the JSON format, you have to come down and check the data sets and linked services, because the same data sets and linked services which are created in development that are not available here in the maybe production environment. Yes, there is a possibility to copy data sets and linked services also using this JSON format, but we would be seeing all this in further. You can copy pipeline, you can copy activity, you can pipeline, I mean, you can copy data sets and linked services also, like a JSON copy, which I have done for the one single pipeline. There is a feasibility. And this is how it is done. I mean, there are no other ways, but this is how it is done if you want to create that same pipeline in a different environment. So this is moreover a kind of ADF, basics of ADF, which we kind of discussed. Going further, we would be discussing many other components, maybe other activities. We would be covering each and every activity in detail. This is again a re-recorded session. So what was specifically covered in the morning, I have covered everything in detail. If any additional information is required, this would be again published to the YouTube also. Probably if any additional information is required, the people who are enrolling, make sure you have a credit card handy with you in tomorrow's session. We need to activate that Azure portal. Once you activate the Azure portal, your subscription would be activated. Then going further, you can use all your services. Right? So assume that everything which I have covered is clearly understood. Any questions? Maybe in further sessions, we can discuss everything in detail. Yep. Thank you, everyone.